So we have
Yeah.
come up with a question, how can artists develop work that resonates in public spaces while staying true to their artistic vision, while still hitting the objective of the proposal? What are some of those challenges balancing the personal expression with the needs of expectations of the public and commissioning bodies?
This is another very big, meaty one.
Yeah.
There's no easy, quick answer on this. It's something that basically you spend time and it takes a lot of trial and error and it takes a lot of trying some things and then trying other things. But a good place to start is just start noticing art in public spaces. Just start noticing things that you as an artist are drawn to. Start noticing things that potentially align with your existing practice. Um, and once you start noticing, you might start seeing it more and you might get ideas for your existing practice that could broaden it a little further into a more public way. Um, so that's kind of the first step. It's just to start thinking about your work and your practice in that format, which artists haven't like that's sometimes the hardest thing to do is to take that leap, right? Is to
Hmm.
go from having a studio practice where it's small and personable or things that are, bound to a wall or easy to move around to think about, well, how could I do a permanent whole room installation? How could I do a large sculpture or, if that's what you're drawn to. But honestly, the big sculptures, they are few and far between. There's not that many of them out there. There's not that many of opportunities out there, but there's more and more opportunities now for permanent installations for lobbies and offices and buildings. Like our apartment buildings need beautiful work in their spaces. So as you're out and about in the world, just start paying attention to some of those, you know, lobbies and spaces and look at the art and see how, does that resonate with you and your practice? And if it does, then you're not that far from taking that step because, yeah, if you see work that, like, wow, I do similar work to that, then there's a
Yeah.
market for it out there.
Yeah. Oftentimes when I'm working with stakeholders, they do use words like we need to activate our spaces. Like
Yeah.
there's the logistics of okay, we need walkways to go to the elevator, but even logistically, we can use vocabulary, but the stakeholders are using, they're activating their spaces. They want it to be a statement piece. They want it to
Mhm.
enliven the area or create some sort of emotion. And then we can, you know, continue on the meatiness of that question, even
And that's so
logistically.
broad. Like
Yeah.
so many different artists and artworks could fit into that. Um, Often they are working within an existing brand guideline for their building and their community or their business. Um, so they often will start from that place because that's what they know. If
Yeah.
their brand is the color blue, they're going to be looking for blue art. It's just or
Yep.
something that complements it. Um,
Yes,
but
exactly. That still has a conversation with their brand to keep it a
yeah,
movement. Yeah.
another challenge is that these corporate entities often and communities, all sorts of spaces want art that's timeless, art that isn't, especially if it's for a permanent install, that it's not going to 5 years from now feel like, oh, that's so 2015 or so part of the way that they do that is and it's also tends to align with just corporate guidelines in general,
Mm.
not anything that's specifically political or specifically, and sometimes they might be looking for that. It depends on the client, but generally speaking,
Yeah.
um, timeless art falls into timeless, like either abstracts or landscapes, and you could still have a political or environmental mission behind your work, but um, text-based stuff is hit or miss. Now we're getting into media. I feel like I'm jumping around a bit, but the trying to align with the community, there's no one right answer because there's no one community. Like it's different for every space, every organization, every building. You might, it's
Yeah, I
It's
think it
so
just goes
different.
back to like we're starting to build this list for artists, and it is do your research,
Hmm.
hit some values, what is it, what is the artwork mirroring, you know, um, and we're going to start continuing and giving more information as specific, even logistics. I mean, yeah, you got to be careful with developing a
Yeah.
proposal with safety checks and a lot of the buildings, the corporate buildings, the apartment complexes, the campuses, there's ADA rules that are coming into play. There's
Yeah.
that have changed, a
Yeah.
lot of those things have changed, and the lighting world, I think, has changed a lot for public art too.
Sometimes lighting is public art. So
Yes. Yes.
that can be very fun.
That can be very
But
fun.
yeah, there's so many considerations with public art, not just the content, but yeah, ADA clearance requirements of if anything's sticking out more than 3.5 inches, you have to have a cane guard at the base. So that's valid even for wall art. So
Yeah.
it's something that has to be considered in the public realm,
And
because these are, the public. You have different considerations than artwork that would hang in a private collection in a home, because there's so many variety of people that may or may not interact with it in a public space.
yeah.
So you have to
S-
plan for all these contingencies.
Stairwells. I think that was something that I learned last year. Was some of the policies and procedures between different states and having art that was installed in a stairwell. That was my big learning
Huh.
curve last year. Yeah, huge.
That no
Weight
no projections allowed or weight requirements
weight
or
requirements and the
hmm.
distance because the stairwells are already more narrow, and so the artwork couldn't
Yeah.
stick. If we were going to stick a painting that had some sculptural qualities to it, it was a textile, and it was, we had to not project it off the wall. The artist had projected it really far off the wall, and kept having
Mm,
to rethink it, reimagine it to fit the fire codes. Yeah.
tricky.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
tricky. It was tricky. Okay, yeah. So we've talked, your other previous points were researching and noticing other art so artists can start to get a clear picture on how to develop art in public space for that call. Um, a lot of boards and a lot of the stakeholders often will say something like they want something that's timeless, a little less
Hmm.
dated, like you were talking about with the nudes and the landscapes, um, on that point. But what if somebody just wants, and some of the artists, I won't name names like dudes, but what if they just want like a giant obelisk in the middle of this entryway? Like what if they just have to have that? What's your point of view?
Well, that artist is welcome to propose that. And if it comes to the committee and maybe the committee or the panel, likes this artist, likes part of the proposal, working with community and groups like this and public entities and public stakeholders is that an artist needs to be flexible and you need to be prepared to make some changes. And you shouldn't take it personally, because that's the whole thing of work in community or work in public spaces is a fluid, changing, growing thing. Um, a stakeholder group will maybe even the call, they said we want an obelisk, but then they start seeing a bunch of different types of obelisks and towers, and they realize like actually we think we want something more organic instead. um, the successful artists will be the ones that can respond to the feedback they're getting from these panels and committees. So say, you've submitted you responded to what they were initially asking, you've become a finalist, you're starting to present or actually talk with this group, and they start shifting and spitballing that, well, maybe we want something that has some more organic element. Don't resubmit the same obelisk. Like maybe it's an obelisk that has some organic things growing out of it, or it's got maybe there's something different, but some sort of response or answering what they're potentially shifting or changing with. Sometimes this is an iterative process.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's um, like you don't want it to go on too long. Ideally, it's only, 2 rounds of this tops before they've decided, like, yes, we're going to work with you. And then you get paid for more rounds. But yeah,
Yeah, and that's a very valid point. Like, how do artists get paid for all these rounds? Then we're going to go into that contract
into
negotiation
contracts.
definitely in
Yeah.
this workshop. It's just not right this second, but you bet we're going to help
But
out with that.
yeah, kind of coming back to just deep, broaden and deepen that, like it's a challenging process for artists to go through. It's hard to dream up a beautiful obelisk or a tower and then have a committee say, actually, we think we want this to have a branch coming out of it. Um, it's hard to take your vision as an artist and then have a other people who may not have any idea about art um, play with your work, so to speak. But the magic with public art and like the real grit of how people are successful doing this type of work is to be able to take that feedback and translate it in a way that still is true and resonates for you and your work. And that is honestly where I see artists kind of make or break in public art. It's
Mhm.
if you have the ability or your work is flexible and malleable enough to be able to respond in a way that still is true to you as an artist, like that's the magic spot. And there's no prescriptive or right answer of how to get there. It's just take the feedback, sit with it, honor your feelings of, oh, I really don't want to have to change my obelisk. That sketch or that idea is yours. You own it. They don't. You can still take that idea and propose it for another project. But if you want to continue with this project, you need to think about a way to design a branch onto your obelisk. It's
Yeah.
but do it in a way that still is yours. So that would be the number one advice for this of it's an iterative process and it
You
takes
have to like
malleability.
working with, I'm sorry, what was that? Because I just was going to
It
say you
takes
need to like
malleability. Yeah. You
flexibility.
have to be flexible and malleable.
Yeah. You got to like
And
working with
yeah,
people.
yeah, you do. It's um it's hard to do public art without having to work with people directly.
Yeah.
Sometimes whole community groups. So.
Yeah.